All right, so here's our notes for Thursday. We're going to start a new unit on Asia. It's going to be a fairly quick unit. There's only like 30 slides-ish. We've covered a lot of the things that we would talk about in other places in world history when we talked about all the different Chinese dynasties. So we talked about a lot of this stuff already. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on this right now. You'll have a assignment that'll be in Schoology that'll be due at midnight tonight, and then you will have tomorrow. We'll do notes, quick notes, and you'll get your project. Your project will be due in about a week. I'm in the process of finishing that up right now, so we'll talk about that Friday when I get back. So Asia. So just like every other thing that we've started with is physical characteristics. There are a lot of mountains in Asia. The highest mountains in the world are in Asia, including the Himalayas, which are the largest, the Western and Eastern Ghats, which are in India, and Mount Fuji, which is located in Japan. It is a volcano. It is one of 47 active volcanoes on the island of Japan. We talked about the Ring of Fire when we talked about Russia, and how the Ring of Fire pretty much encompasses this entire area. And Japan was initially a volcanic island, so a lot of active volcanoes still in Japan, including Mount Fuji. You can see there is sacred to the Shintos. The Shintos are actually what you're going to do your homework on tonight. Again, check Schoology for the specifics on that. So one of the reasons that we'll talk about mountains, and one of the things that it impacts in Asia, is population. Wherever there's mountains, there's fewer people that actually live in the mountains. We can't grow food on top of a mountain. Water is tougher to come by because it's frozen, so it affects the population. Less people live on mountains or around mountains than in valleys with rivers. It's hard to move from one side of a mountain to another. So the people on one side of the mountain are isolated from the people on the other side of the mountain, which eventually can lead to some issues with civil wars and battles and stuff like that. But mountains typically tend to isolate people from other people. So some of the cultural diffusion and stuff that we talked about when we talked about Africa and some of those type of things aren't as widespread. They're a little bit more individualized in Asia. And then climate. There's a couple different climates in Asia. It's a big place, so there's more than a couple. But one thing that mountains do is on one side of the mountain you have this type of weather, and the other side of the mountain you have that type of weather, because mountains affect weather patterns. Same thing with on one side of California you have this type of weather, and the other side of California you have that type of weather based on where the mountains are. The mountains lead to deserts, and they lead to rainy seasons, and they just have a big effect on climate overall. And of course, like we already talked about, living on top of a mountain is cold. So the other thing that we always talk about when we talk about geography is we talk about bodies of water. So you can see there's a map of Asia over there on the right, and it's China and Tibet and India and Thailand and Pakistan and all those places. Basically every place to the east of the Middle East and south of Russia. So you can see kind of the area there. There's a handful of water ports and access points that are important. Like I said, a lot of these we talked about when we talked about Chinese dynasties, because the majority of these sprang up, the dynasties sprang up on these rivers, mainly the Yangtze. But you got the Mekong, you got the Pacific Ocean, you got the Indian Ocean, you got the Bay of Bengal, you have the South China Sea, you have all these areas that are populated because of the rivers that run through them. The one thing you need to know from this whole slide, you don't need to know any, I'm not going to test you on list all the rivers. The one thing you should know, though, is you should know that all the rivers begin in Tibet. Well, not all the rivers. Most of the rivers begin in Tibet. So you can see right here, over here you see the Tibetan Plateau, and you can see the majority of the rivers start here and then go out to a variety of ports. That's one of the reasons why China also had a heavy trade population. And not only on the eastern side of the Tibetan Plateau, but also on the western side, you can see through Pakistan, the Ganges through India. All these rivers pretty much start right there. We will talk about a few rivers in particular, so these you will have to be responsible for, but you don't have to, like I said on the last slide, you don't have to list all the rivers and lakes and stuff. That's not necessary. The first one is Ganges. Ganges is considered sacred by the Hindu people, and at the end of the chapter, or at the end of the unit, we'll talk about Hindus and Buddhists. The Ganges River is heavily polluted. I mean, just look at all those old people and flowers. No, but seriously, most of the rivers in this neck, not most of the rivers, but a good chunk of the rivers in this area, because China hasn't had the same amount of environmental protection that the United States had, or because they've been a little bit slower to go through some of the environmental protection, and it goes back to developing versus developed. And most of these countries, even though they might be considered developed now, they're still on the developing side of things for a large portion of their population. And one of those things is the technology and the understanding of healthcare, and that's one of the issues that they keep going through, and they have some more pollution. They don't take quite as good a care of their rivers as some other places. So obviously, just like everything else we've talked about with water, water also has a significant influence on where people live. The majority of the agriculture takes place to water, so we just got done talking about Africa and how in Africa they have deserts and stuff like that in northern Africa, so there's no farming going on there. Every place that there were people, like if you go through Egypt, it's a whole bunch of desert, but then you have the Nile River running through there. So obviously, if you have water, you can have agriculture. If you have agriculture, you can have food. If you have food, you can have people. If you don't have water and you don't have food, you can't have people. Mentioned it earlier, you have some trade that goes through, and you know, we talked about when we were in world history, we talked about Marco Polo and the Silk Road, and we'll mention the Silk Road, but we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. But there's a lot of trading that goes on up and down the river through various peoples in China, and then as outsiders came in and started to trade within the continent of China, it granted them easy access to different trading materials. And then transportation. Much like with trading, you got to be able to move up and down the river, and then to be able to take something from mainland China, in the heart of China, and put it on a boat in the river and take it to the ocean and take it anywhere in the world, is a significant advantage as you're starting to develop as a country. We'll talk a little bit about climate. So it's a big place. There's a variety of climates. They range from tropical wet, so rainforests in like Vietnam and Laos and Thailand and some of those places. Humid continental. There's a couple deserts. There is the Gobi Desert, which is located in western China. And then there's the Plateau of Tibet. It's high elevation, very cold. It's almost tundra-ish, but not a lot of things grow on the Plateau of Tibet or the Gobi Desert. That's where we're going to stop for today. So there's your notes for today. There's an assignment that will be posted on Schoology, and if you have extra time after you're done with that, you can work on something else. Now remember, the assignment on Schoology is due tonight. So you don't have a couple days to finish it up. It is due tonight. All right? See you tomorrow. Bye.